90.3 WHPC now presents Law You Should Know. The law affects every aspect of our lives, our home, our jobs, and our recreational activities. Now, learn about the law and how to protect yourself against the loss of your liberty or property, and learn how to stand up for your rights and seek compensation when you have been wronged. Your host for Law You Should Know is attorney Kenneth J. Landau, a past dean of the Nassau Academy of Law, and frequently lectures to lawyers on ethics and avoiding problems with clients, and to the public on how to choose and use lawyers. This is Law You Should Know on the voice of Nassau Community College, 90.3 WHPC.
Hi, this is Ken Landau, and welcome to Law You Should Know. Today we'll be interviewing Jessica Weaver. She is a financial author, a blogger, a certified financial professional, and she's also a certified financial planner, and she'll be talking about some of the issues relating to relationships between money and spouses that may become especially important in a marriage or in the event of a divorce. Jessica, welcome to Law You Should Know.
Oh, thank you for having me, Ken. I am excited to be here.
Okay, and I hope you can provide, much information of interest to clients, even if they're not getting divorced, just so they maintain their financial independence and financial health. Why is it important for one spouse to know if the other is a financial bully, to promote matrimonial harmony, and also to be on a level playing field if there's a divorce?
Yes, I like how you said a level playing field. It's really so that both spouses have an active voice in the financial decisions. And I see it in different ways that a spouse could be a financial bully, whether they just take over all the conversations, all of the decisions. They're the only one meeting with the financial advisor. They're the only one reviewing the tax returns, those type of things. I also see it where the spouse kind of hides everything from the other spouse. And that's a very scary one. If you have no idea what's going on, how much money you have, I see it a lot when women come to me like, I think we have savings. I really don't know. And it turns out they're $100,000 in credit card debt. I had no idea. And
it could also be a problem where one spouse, be it the husband or wife, is a business owner, and you don't know what assets or income of the business is theirs, or they have access to, or control over, etc. And this could be during or at the end of a marriage.
Yes, exactly. Especially that you've been in the business for a long time. And sometimes the one spouse has been helping to run the business, right? They're doing the books, they're doing the invoicing, they have an active role helping to build a business. Now they're coming up to a divorce, and the business owner's like, I don't want a business evaluation done on the business because when it costs money and I don't feel like paying for it, and their spouse doesn't really know what their true value is. So they think they're going to run away scot-free with the bulk of the money, the bulk of the business, and not having to worry about selling the business or taking equity out to pay off the spouse.
And just as an equitable and egalitarian marriage, it's important in good times. We've been talking about some of the bad times, and we'll get back to that later. But even in the good times, it's better if both partners are savvy about the income and expenses in general about the other spouse, and if there's a business related to one of those spouses, to that as well.
There's so much pressure when one spouse is earning all the money and making all the decisions. There's a lot of pressure. There's guilt from the other spouse. It builds resentment. And I just feel like there's such a strain on the relationship when one spouse is earning all the money, making all the decisions. So even if you aren't the one out there working, you're still a working spouse, but you're not the compensated spouse, let's say, still being engaged in it and knowing what's going on and making decisions together. So there's not so much pressure. That burden is put on the one. It really does help the relationship grow.
And there'll also be premarital counseling or marital counseling if there are different perspectives about spending. If one wants a fancy cruise as opposed to a car trip, if one person wants a fancy house as opposed to a functional one, if one person wants to spend thousands of dollars on jewelry or on their hobby and the other one doesn't, should they make sure they're on the same page for the harmony of the marriage and to keep these issues at bay?
Yes, that is such a loaded question. It's true. Like we all grow up differently around money. We're all influenced differently. We all have different priorities. One spouse could be very long-term focused and want to save everything for retirement. And the other spouse is short-term focus, looking at how can we pay off our student loans, right? Something as simple as that, but they had no idea there was such a disconnect with their priority. It's true. I have one couple and they never spoke about money going into the marriage. They got married later in life. So they thought they were both owning their own houses. They figured they were both pretty financially independent. Well, it turns out a year in and the one spouse is bleeding money, credit card debt, can barely cover his bills, and she's getting pulled into it. It's kind of like this financial trap, and she had no idea. And she just keeps thinking getting married has been the worst financial decision. It's no longer about love. It's the money.
And sometimes before you get married, it's probably good to know the person that you're marrying is the person they are, and they're not bringing a lot of debt into the marriage that you may or may not be responsible for.
Exactly.
Even had a prior bankruptcy, which may jeopardize your financial relationship going forward.
Yes, I just had a session with a couple and they're getting married in a few months. And that's exactly what they wanted to do. They wanted to make sure they were on the same page and that they were coming together as a team for their money, that this wasn't going to be pulling them apart, that they're actually going to be pulling them together and excited over money instead of fighting over it.
And if a couple, let's say everything else is in harmony, but they have different relationships to money, is it a good idea to establish a no complaint zone? So one person could take a sea vacation, one person go on a golf or fishing trip, assuming that the money's available and they can do different things they enjoy that may not be so cheap.
Yeah, we call them the non-negotiables. You almost can come to the table and say, this is a non-negotiable for me. I need to have my Starbucks coffee every morning, and I don't want you to make me feel guilty for that.
But there should be parity, let's say.
Exactly. Yes. It's kind of coming to the table like, this is something that's really important to me. Here's why. And more coming from a place of understanding than just, I can't believe you spend so much money on the kids. I can't believe you spend so much money on your clothes. What is a real underwriting reason we're spending all this money on a certain thing? Is this really something important to them? And then agree on it, agree to disagree, but you each can have that non-negotiable in your life.
And is that important to discuss before the marriage or during the marriage, before things get out of hand? And again, assuming the money is available to finance these habits.
I would say before the marriage, because it almost becomes like a runaway train. As you get deeper and deeper into the marriage, it just builds and builds and builds, and it causes resentment and conflict. And then you think, especially of children, what are the children witnessing by you disagreeing with your spouse about money, by fighting over money? Now the children are seeing it, and that's how they view money. That is always going to cause fighting. It's going to cause negativity and resentment. Now the children are going to want to shy away from money and be intimidated by money.
Now, you also work with people who are, let's say, getting divorced or they're getting remarried, or one spouse may have children from prior marriage. How do those children come into the picture? What are some issues they have to think about, negotiate, set up a strategy for before going into that second marriage?
Second marriage, and it's very prevalent nowadays, which is great, but makes it a little bit more complex. We need to make sure that the children are taken care of as well as a new spouse. We have to update all beneficiaries so that your ex-spouse isn't getting all of the benefits. We have to make sure your estate documents are done properly so that everyone's taken care of. Right? My mother went through this when her father got remarried. He never set up a will. He passes away while she was in college, and everything got left to her stepmother. Her great-grandmother's house, her grandmother's, car, her grandfather's antique sword collection, all of it got left to her stepmom. And guess what she said? I'm not paying for your college. I'm not supporting you. You're not getting any of your dad's stuff. And that's what can tear a family apart.
So it's very important to be aware of this, to understand the title to property.
Yes.
To have an exchange of information before people go into a second marriage and make sure they're on the same page with that.
Exactly. Especially when there's other children involved. And even understanding how much of that community money, both spouses are pulling in income, how much of that is going to children from the first marriage? Because that can lead to a lot of fighting and disagreements as well.
And even with the children and between the children.
Exactly. Yes. You want to make sure everyone feels loved and everyone is supported, and understanding, well, what does that look like when it comes down to the actual dollar amount?
I know you also try to educate people, especially even well-to-do people, about being aware of their areas of money and especially of the other, such as Social Security and stock options and tax liabilities and penalties. Just what advice do you have about all that?
It's so important to be educated, especially when we're talking about divorce. You think of how many divorces there's unnecessary taxes being paid because they feel that they need to sell the stock to transition it over or split it between the spouses, when you don't actually need to sell it. You can just split the shares. Or even you're comparing retirement money to non-retirement money. $1 million in an IRA isn't really worth $1 million because all that money has to get taxed at some point. Versus $1 million in a bank account, that money's already been taxed. Versus money that's stuck in a house equity. It's really understanding, how are things being taxed? How accessible is that money? Are there fees and penalties to taking that money out if I need it now? And again, with the investments, right? If you don't really know a whole bunch about the stock market and now you're about to take over control over a divorce settlement with $1 million in stocks, that could really intimidate you. That could really stress you out.
And even if someone's not getting divorced, but it's good to make sure both people have information about the assets and the tax consequences of those assets to see if there's a better way to structure them or minimize taxes down the road.
Exactly. Yes. Being educated, and also so that, let's say your spouse invested a whole bunch of money in one hot stock and now the stock's worth nothing. Well, the one spouse is going to feel like he failed the whole family, and the whole burden was just on that person. Being educated and being involved in those conversations and the decisions so that you can make them together. You're on the same team. It just can bring you together instead of blaming one another if something doesn't work out.
And information is power. So should both spouses, even if one is the major breadwinner, if one has a complicated business, tax return, should the other spouse who's going to be signing that return and may have some legal liability make sure they understand, what's going into that return? Not just sign their name.
Exactly. It's so important to know what is on that tax return. And I encourage people, if they're going through a divorce and they haven't been the one involved with the tax returns, to bring in another accountant to review them so they're not blindsided by things. All this, and they understand how much income is being paid out from the business if they are a business owner. How much are they using for their lifestyle to support their lifestyle? And I'll give you an example again. I called the $1 million meeting, a woman just on the brink of divorce. Her husband was a breadwinner, made all the decisions, and we went through her tax returns for 5 years. And I found about $1 million, even her divorce attorney didn't know about, just by going through the line items and seeing, okay, there's a lot of capital gains here. Where is that coming from? It was stock options that nobody knew he was getting, that he was selling off to support his mistress, obviously, of course, in another country. But when you can comb through those with an expert, you're going to find money that you would have left on the table or didn't know about. So it is very important to be educated on those pieces.
So in a non-divorce situation, you can help one or both spouses improve their financial quotient, their knowledge about their assets, the best way to hold those assets, and the best, tax consequences down the road. In the case of divorce, you can educate the lawyer and that spouse you're representing about some of the nuances and, potential hidden money, etc., or unrealized assets.
Exactly. Yes. So what's the best saving vehicle as you're building wealth together as spouses? Educate on that, then aligning it with the right type of investment product that's going to, whether it's we're focused on getting income, growing the money, being tax efficient, right? All these different ideas and options. And then same thing with divorce. It's like this audit, this analysis to say, okay, where is the money? And sometimes you don't even realize, especially going through divorce, they're overspending. So now you're going from one income in one household to one income in two households, and you are already overspending.
So people might have to shrink their expenses and downside their lifestyle in a divorce.
That happens majority of the time, yes. And that is a shock to the system. You're used to a certain lifestyle.
And sometimes it's good to divorce while things are good for your spouse and not good for you, depending on the laws of that state. Mm-hmm. And you certainly may not want to do it. And that's why during COVID, people might be refusing divorce, holding off on divorce, because one or both could be in financial straits.
Yes, COVID's made it very interesting because some people, the non-working spouse is trying to wait until the working spouse gets their income back up or a new job because they want that alimony child support. And then that other spouse might be trying to rush it. So there's a huge disconnect between the spouses.
And you should speak to your lawyer, of course, but the ideal time might be while their spouse is doing well, assuming you can share in their riches, and you're not doing so well, because there's nothing for your spouse to share in terms of your riches. But again, it's a very complicated issue, and you should discuss it with divorce attorneys. I just want to remind our listeners that you're listening to Law You Should Know. We're talking with Jessica Weaver. She is a financial author, blogger, and speaker, and a financial consultant, especially in the area of financing and spending discrepancies between couples, and as an advocate and an analyst if it is a divorce. And Jessica, I know that you've written some books with much more detail about these topics we've been covering. Just tell us some more about those books.
Of course, my first book is Strong Woman, Stronger Assets. And that is how we raise your net worth by raising your self-worth and focusing on the internal factors that direct your bank account, not just the external, which is what most of my industry preaches about, right? Investment, taxes, inflation. But it really does start with, what are our fears around money? That's dictating how we're behaving with money. And we go into, and there's so many stories of women. I interviewed about 100 women for that book alone. And it's all stories of women who have gone through a major transition, a divorce, very prevalent in the book, losing a spouse or loved one, career changes, retirement. And then my second book, Time to Refine, A Strong Woman's Guide to Retiring on Her Own Terms, is all about kind of this new age of retirement. It's not how my grandmother retired, right? We don't just sit on the couch our whole retirement. We might go on one cruise and that's about it. We are doing things in retirement now, and we call it refinement, right? Really refining our lives to this work optional lifestyle. I work if I want to, or I can volunteer. I don't have to. And how do we get our money to that place? That's security.
And hopefully you may have enough to live off the fruits of your labors, Social Security, your investments, your retirements, etc.
Exactly. How do we build steady, secure streams of income? They surveyed retirees, and the happy retiree has 3 to 4 sources of income because they're not so dependent on what the stock market does. They're not so dependent on Social Security making it. They are building and layering income.
And sometimes even before retirement, it's good to have different streams of income, because if one of them takes a hit or is in a lull, you have your other streams to count on.
I love that you just said that. Exactly. That's what we call a money empire. And that's something we teach women as they are in the accumulation phase. You don't just have to live off of your employment income, because what happens? You get laid off, or COVID hits, a pandemic hits, your industry changes, your income gets reduced or completely cut off. Having other streams of income coming in that you have control over. Usually employment income, we don't have so much control over that. Any point that can get cut off. So building that into your money plan gives you such security. And if one stream evaporates or comes to an end, perhaps you can find new streams of income. Exactly.
And once you reach retirement, you may be able to have, different streams of income come into the picture.
Yes. It's really just giving yourself that flexibility and options. So you're not stuck at this job that you hate for 30, 40 years, hoping at some point to have $1 million to retire. Being able to leave that job, go back to school if you want to, or just start a business, have a career change.
You mentioned it earlier, but is it important to have a certain wall between marital assets and your own assets to, protect them from invasion? If there's a judgment creditor, if there's a divorce, if there's some other unforeseen event?
Yes, it's very good to understand what assets are going to be lumped in as marital assets and which to keep separate. And especially if it's an inheritance, something that's being passed down from generations to generations, right? We have one client and stock that her mother gave her on her wedding day. She wants it to go to her grandchildren. So we have it set up a certain way to ensure it goes through the bloodline, if that makes sense. Especially, we see it all the time with my couples with their estate documents. Now they're in retirement. They have the most wealth that they've ever had. And they want to make sure that money gets passed to their children, not necessarily their in-laws, even though they usually like their daughter-in-laws, their son-in-laws. But what if they get divorced? Now that money goes to their ex-spouse's new husband and their children. They want it to go to their children and their grandchildren through the bloodlines. So there are so many ways that you can set that up, whether you're going into a marriage or you're thinking about that for your children and your grandchildren.
And you don't have to be getting divorced to think about that, but there are certain different tripwires. If you move it a certain way, if you touch it, if you put your name on it, you may expose yourself to taxes. It may become a marital asset. It may be no longer protected.
Or even lawsuits, right? You're driving one day and get in a car accident and you get sued. Now that money that could have been protected is thrown into the lawsuit. And it's true. It just, when you have this stuff all up front, it doesn't make it an issue later on. That's the biggest piece. Even divorce or no divorce, it's not an issue anymore. You don't have to fight about it. You don't have to worry about it. If you are going through a divorce, it's off the table. You have enough to fight about going through a divorce to have to worry about this.
And if you may want to make sure you have adequate insurance, it's, insurance doesn't necessarily cost money. A few bucks may give you a substantial amount of insurance to protect you and protect your assets from a horrific accident. And it's relatively cheap to have that insurance for your home, for your work, for your automobile. You're not really saving money by having a limited insurance policy. You're putting your assets at risk and losing your peace of mind.
That's such a good point. Yeah, putting your assets at risk. And I always ask this question during a strategy session, how confident are you that your assets are 100% protected from liability and lawsuits? And they're like, oh, I have no idea about that. Don't I have some insurance for it?
And you may always be trying to get the cheapest limits, but you don't want the cheapest insurance because it won't fully protect you. So it's an investment in your peace of mind. And that's something you should discuss with a financial advisor as a lawyer to make sure you have adequate insurance to protect all of your assets and also to keep you from worrying. I just want to remind our listeners, we're talking with Jessica Weaver. As you've heard, she's a financial consultant and advisor and a book author, and has told us many sound practices for protecting our assets at all stages of life, including if we're getting married or getting divorced. Jessica, tell us about your website and other information about your books and your expertise on your website.
Sure. Everything is at jessicaweaver.com. My first two books. We're launching my third book, May of 2021, Confessions of a Money Queen, where I go into my 10 money moves anybody can make that will unblock their money supply. So many times we have these money blocks, we don't even realize it. So how do we get ourselves into a place to receive abundance, receive money, and kind of the spiritual side of money, which is very interesting, especially in my industry. We don't talk about that. It's such a traditional industry. But my blog, Not Your Father's Advisor, is there, all upcoming events. Everything is at jessicaweaver.com, and a ton of free resources we have loaded there.
And basically your function is to help people protect in marriage or single or divorce, to protect their assets, to protect them from creditors or liabilities, to help preserve them and help them grow and be available for when they're necessary down the road.
Exactly. Like you said, we look at the risks to your money, to your income, your future risks, like long-term care costs, longevity risks to your money, inflation, taxes. We look at all of the risks. We really look, what are the variables working for your money and what are working against your money? How do we
sometimes it's good to have that financial checkup as well.
Oh, that financial
to make
checkup.
sure,
Exactly.
understand what assets are, what streams of assets there are, which you may want to keep separate, preserve for another generation. Mm-hmm. Maybe the consequences of intermingling assets.
Exactly. No matter what size wealth you have, there are so many strategies, which means there are so many opportunities to optimize on that money so that you don't have to save twice as much, work 3 times as hard to get to the same dollar amount. And that's what I want people to know. Like, it doesn't have to be so hard. You don't have to work 30, 40 years at a job you hate to hope to have $1 million to retire one day. We can do so much work to have the lifestyle that you want right now, that you deserve, while saving plenty for the future.
And is it worth, sometimes people are, they're focused on work and how much they earn and the hours that are taking a lot out of them. Is there a better way to value their job or their time, or like a line not to cross in the quest of money or a higher income?
There is. When you think about it, we work 5 days a week for 2 days off. That's a negative 60% rate of return on our time. We would never accept that with our money. Yet somehow we got thrown into this scam. And it's true. If you really are working 80 hours a week, and then you look at what's your true income? If you have to drink a bottle of wine every night, or if you need to go on a vacation to sit on the beach and do nothing to recharge every few months, those are all work-related expenses, and that's dinging your income.
So that you're saying someone might be making $300,000 as an associate at a prominent law firm, but they're working 80 more hours a week. They have to divide it in 2.
Yes.
So maybe they have to make a further calculation, and that's how much it's shortening their life expectancy.
Yes.
And how much it's impinging on their quality of life, which may not, might be beyond that division.
And they're probably spending a lot of money catching up for that 80 hours that they're not at home doing things. Their health's taking a toll, right? They have to pay more money for takeout food, for somebody to clean their house. They're spending money to recharge, to go on vacation. Those are all work-related.
They may be too tired to enjoy it, or they may not live to enjoy it.
It's true. I see that a lot, especially I see with my clients, they're 50s and 60s, they're gaining weight, their cholesterol, their blood pressure, it's all going up. Now they're having hip and knee replacements. It starts to spiral, and it pains me because retirement, they should have the best health.
So some kind of balance is important, and you want to preserve your health so you can enjoy it after retirement.
Exactly. Yeah. That's the time to enjoy your money and your life.
And you want to make it that far. I'd like to thank our guest, Jessica Weaver. You can find out more about her advice and her books at Jessica Weaver, WEAVER.com. Keep in mind, this podcast will be available at nccradio.org in case you want to tell someone else about it or listen to it again. Please also remember that this information is presented as information only and should not be construed as financial or legal advice, which you must get from a qualified person after they review your own personal situation. Please join us next week at this same time on 90.3 WHPC in Garden City, Long Island, New York, for another program on Law You Should Know.